And welcome to what absolutely promises to not just be a fascinating, but a educational episode of Dogma Debate, because I have Brittney Hartley here with me, and she's an author. She wrote the book No Nonsense Spirituality, All the Tools, No Faith Required. And I came across her on TikTok, and she's a teacher. I mean, I feel like I have learned so much watching her videos. So Brittney, thanks for coming on the show.
That's my pleasure to be here. And being a teacher was my day job. I was a history teacher before I started to do what I do now. So I found a weird way to be able to still be teaching. And so my TikToks are very long because like all history teachers, I'm very long-winded. But it's something that I really enjoy.
Oh, that's so great. That's one of my other passions. I absolutely love history. But you grew up Mormon. You grew up deeply in the faith, and you lost
hmm
your faith in your exploration of your religion when you were at theology school. Do you mind telling me a little bit about that?
Sure. So just kind of briefly, and then we can dig in anywhere that you want. I was raised Mormon, and was the kind of kid that like took matters of epistemology and metaphysics very seriously. I really wanted to know what is, and if there's a God, and if there's a certain way I should live my life. I figured that was like the most important thing to know, and so I was always a curious child in that way. And so I lost my faith in Mormonism by the time I was a teenager and was kicked out of my home because of decisions that I made in that faith loss, and kind of stumbled into nuanced Christianity is what you would call it now. I don't know what I would have called it then. I probably didn't have the language for it. Went to theology school to study Christianity because, of course, everyone says like, yeah, deconstruct from Mormonism. Like that's a crazy religion. You had the wrong Jesus. You had the wrong God. So I said, fantastic. Like we'll go to theology school. Ended up losing my faith in Christianity in theology school, and then also lost my faith in God. So here I am, having spent 2 decades studying history and theology and philosophy, trying to make sense of God and faith and what is. And at the end of that journey, kind of coming to a place where I just said, well, I know nothing and I'm a newborn baby. And now I'm, 35 years old. And what do I do now, kind of thing. And there were some dark times in that as I had to recalibrate my foundation. How do you do truth without God? How do you do morality without God? How do you do meaning and purpose without God? How do you do community and identity without God? How do you do ritual and awe and love and transcendence without God? And kind of rebuilt what I would call a spiritual, even meaningful, purpose filled life, a thriving life post religion. But it took a lot of work and tools to get there, that I think some secular people take for granted. When secular people or people who are raised atheists listen to me, they're like, well, yeah, obviously religion, is crazy or whatever they say. But it's not obvious when you're raised in it. It when you lose your foundation, it's very hard for the brain to kind of readjust when you kind of lose your foundation for literally every aspect of your life. So rebuilt, and now kind of do spirituality post religion, even spirituality post God. And now my job is essentially helping others as a spiritual director wherever they are in that deconstruction or reconstruction process, and helping them find tools to make that process easier. So wherever
Wow.
you want to jump in there.
Well, actually, the first thing I wanted to jump in, I want to get to how you lost your faith, because that
Mm.
story was so interesting. The information, it's just nothing that I'd heard before in somebody's loss of faith story before. But before I get there, I do want to just, you said you got kicked out of your house when you quit being a Mormon.
Yeah, so I was kicked out of my home when I was 16, for having sex with my boyfriend, which was a part of like, well, I didn't believe Mormonism anymore, so like I may as well, do what 16-year-olds do with their boyfriends. And yeah, I was removed from my home for that.
Wow, it strikes me because it's a point that I often make when debating Christians, which is they say, homosexuality is not natural. I'm like, well, we look at the animal kingdom and we can see
Mm.
that clearly it is. But what's not natural is parents throwing a beautiful, wonderful child out of their home for nothing other than just, loving who they wanted to love or whatever.
Mm.
And it kind of makes me think of that when you say that.
Yeah,
It's like,
that goes like with that quote that to make, good people do bad things, it takes religion. The one
yeah,
that comes to mind the most is in the FLDS church, kind of the more fundamentalist forms of Mormonism. There's places in southern Utah. For polygamy to work, you need a lot more women than men, and so there'll be mothers that will drop off their teenage son at a gas station and drive away, and there are people
what?
there who have set up, mobile homes to try to help these young men who essentially just get dropped off and they drive away. And it does take religion to do something like that, I
That I
think.
did not know that, and I actually read Under the Banner of Heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched a documentary about Warren Jeffs and the FLDS as well. And even with that, I didn't hear that. That is straight out of like, a pride of lions or something like that, where the young man is like kicked
Mm-hmm.
out because the alpha
Mm-hmm.
male doesn't want him. I mean,
Yeah, polygamy only, you can only have a man marry 50 women if you've kicked out a lot of young boys along the way.
wow, that is heartbreaking. That makes me so sad.
Mm-hmm.
And what lost souls those young boys must be. And I mean, just jeepers, the rejection from your mother of all things, and you're just mind blown.
Yeah.
That said, and by the way, I guess in that case, the polygamist in charge, I guess the Warren Jeff of sorts, would was the boy's father. Like complete rejection from both your parents. I
Yeah.
mean, just me absolutely devastating. And there's another example of religion doing bad. So you lost your faith because you have this amazing skill, which is tell me about your society and I'll tell you about your God. Do you mind telling me
Yeah.
a little bit about that? Because that was so fascinating.
Sure. So, what happens when you're studying the Bible and you start really digging into the complexity of it? That this isn't just like a book where God just like says things and it's all clear and, crystal clear. It's a very, very complex document with multiple authors and translations and scribes and additions and pulling mythology from other places. It's just an incredibly complex thing. So, as you're studying the Bible, you start learning how aspects of the society at the time will change and then God will change too. So an easy example is, we don't really have a concept of hell in the Old Testament. We have some concept of an afterlife, but there's not moral distinctions. There's not good people go here and bad people go here. It's just kind of this afterlife place where there's not really a lot happening, to be honest. And it's because in the Old Testament, the blessings and the justice of God, the blessings or condemnation of God happens in your lifetime. It happens here. Then they get conquered and the bad guys win, and now they're a conquered people. And so what do you do in your theology when you're supposed to be blessed for being the covenant people and having the correct God, and now you're a conquered people and the bad guys truly did win? Well, what happens? Well, all of a sudden we start to have, well, maybe justice then happens in the next life and these people will be punished and will be rewarded if we stay faithful, and we're being tested and all these things. And that's just one tiny example, but there's hundreds of examples of this where something will change in the society and then all of a sudden God or theology or doctrine will change too. The first belief that is, the belief that's the first to go when you're in seminary is this idea that like God is never changing, because in the Bible the concept of God and doctrines are all changing. None of them kind of stay the same.
Right. You talk
So
specifically
yeah.
about the Old Testament versus New Testament God.
Mhm. There's changes there, but I mean, it's just a messy thing. So you get good at, especially when you start adding like the cognitive science of religion and you're studying Mesopotamian culture, maybe you start studying other religions in that, you start getting really good at this, at knowing what kinds of societies create what kinds of gods. And I got so good at it that you could give me a society, tell me how its agriculture works. Because if the flooding is really devastating and random, there's going to be a lot of rituals because you're trying to keep that god happy. If the agriculture is more stable, then you get more benevolent gods that kind of keep the cosmic order going. And you can tell me about the hierarchy, like the social hierarchy. is it authoritarian? Then you're going to get authoritarian God. There's all these things that you can kind of track. And I got to the point where you can give me a society, tell me how it functions. I'll tell you what kind of God they will have created, and I will be right. And then when you can do that for a society, and then you can start to do that even individually as you're learning about individual faith and why people read so many different things in Jesus. Someone who's really high in empathy reads a different Jesus than someone who's really high in loyalty. People who are all autistic tend to be either fundamentalist or atheist, but not in between. And you just start learning these things. And I had this seed of doubt. This was all while being a believer. And I had this seed of doubt that said, what if this is a human project? What if we're the ones creating God rather than God creating us? And I put on that lens because I just still believed that if there was truth, it could withstand scrutiny. And I just put on that lens and said, what does it look like to look at this whole thing from the point of view of secularism or science, human nature, sociology, psychology, anthropology? What if I looked at this as if it's a human project? And when I did, it started to make more and more sense. The easy example that most people agree with is we used to say that people had demons inside of them, and now we would say something like they've been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Even believers will usually give me that, right? They'll usually say something like that, where our diagnosis for schizophrenia just makes a lot more sense than saying that than our supernatural explanation of what was going on. But for me, that started making sense across the board for everything we were doing with gods and religions and spiritual experience. So I got to the point where I was ready to write my dissertation, and then had to admit to myself, which I was not happy about, it's not somewhere that I wanted to go, but finally had to admit to myself that I no longer believed in this God.
Right. And in your case, and this is why I found it so fascinating, that was not I mean, as an anti theist and somebody that came to it very slowly out of Catholicism, and I'd love to ask you about Catholicism a little
Mm,
later, but uh, it was liberating. My life got
mm,
better the minute I didn't feel like there was a wizard in the sky looking down on me. You had the exact opposite experience. And I think a lot of,
yeah.
particularly fundamentalist Christians, have this experience because belief is not a choice.
Mm.
And if you stop believing because you just can't believe anymore, it can be detrimental, if not devastating, as it was for you. But you found your way out, and that's what your book is about. But do you mind, is it all right if I ask you about that dark time in your
Sure,
life?
yeah. And I'm curious for you why there's certain personality types that when they kind of discover that there's no divine plan going on, they find this to be like fantastic news, and they find it to be very freeing. It's usually personality types that value freedom, and authenticity and autonomy. Usually I see like those high core values that they do fine. I did not do great. I'm high in neuroticism. I had kind of no higher in existential anxiety even. And I really struggled with things like, I'm going to die, and what is the point of this? And I'm just suffering. If you're high in suffering also, like if you're neurotic and introverted, which is kind of the most dangerous combination as far as human suffering, you just need a lot more to be able to make life worth it. And so for me, it was a very dark time, because now it just felt like, what is the goddamn point? I'm just going to come here. I'm just going to suffer. Evolution's pulling the strings. I don't have free will. The self is an illusion. God isn't coming. Jesus isn't coming to save us. This is all bullshit. And just playing little stupid human games in the bullshit with no like existential meaning or purpose behind it was just such a shift for my brain that I just feel like my brain like dissociated and checked out, because it was just too much to handle. I just lost. People will describe it as like the floor drops out from underneath of you, because every choice that you've ever made was built on this idea that God exists. And so when that leaves, you don't even know what's up from down anymore. How do I make a moral decision? Like who the fuck cares about any of this then, right? And so it was a super dark time, and got some existential depression and some nihilism, even some suicidal thoughts, before I was able to process what was happening, and be able to get tools and resources to help come out to the other side.
Yeah, and what you discovered was that there are things that that religion offers to a person that we kind of need to flourish and be happy,
Mm.
and that um, just straight up atheism without, I guess, a society or a community around you to offer up these things is going to leave people probably, I don't want to say worse off than they were with religion, because I think believing as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible is the way to live life. But do you mind talking about that a little bit? Like, what are the things that people get out of religion that they have to
Mm.
then find a way to get without religion?
Yeah, what atheists have to admit, especially if you're like, I'm all about the science and data, is that the majority of our studies show that religious people fare better than non-religious people. And there's certain markers that we're using there. So longevity is one, health, community, mental health. Even with COVID, religious people fared better mentally over COVID over non-religious people. And so what we have to look at is why are religious people faring better, at least on some markers of human well-being? And what comes up in the data is that it actually doesn't matter what religion it is. It really doesn't. Whatever your system of order and structure it is. Religion is just the story, the vessel that's carrying all these things that humans need. So stories, which are ways to orient your life, community, which is huge and gives you a social safety net, meaning, purpose, transcendence, moments of awe, rituals are so important scientifically. They help us to decrease pain and increase pleasure and process our emotions. They're really good for rites of passage and religious people tend to be higher in meaning and purpose. They tend to be able to withstand even suffering more because they have a story that can contain it. And when you lose religion, when you lose kind of the container for that, you don't just lose, I don't believe Joseph Smith is a prophet. Like that I can do. I'm doing fine without, orienting my life around that belief. But I lost other things because I lost that belief. I lost access to a family. I lost my identity. I lost the belief that truth is good or that I could even access truth. Maybe we're not even accessing ultimate reality at all. I lost my sense of objective morality and I didn't know how to make sense of morality anymore. I lost just like what do you do with your life? Like what's the point of any of this, right? I'm just going to suffer and I'm just going to die and I'm never going to know the answer to my questions, and would it have been better if I wouldn't have been born, and blah 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 blah, all that kind of stuff. So religion, the beliefs are easy to deconstruct, especially with something like Mormonism, like very easily proven true, proven false religion. But like being a part of a community like Mormonism, like when you're in, isn't it like it was nice. The religion's
Yeah.
crazy. Like and Penn Jillette said something like this. He said that, Mormonism as a religion, as a belief system is absolutely bonkers. But he said the Mormons have got it right. They live communally, very service driven, family oriented. They're cooking for each other. They're showing up for each other when you're sick. They don't do a lot of alcohol and drugs, and they live a healthier lifestyle, and it's a really purpose driven, service filled, communal experience to be a Mormon when you're in it. Not for everyone, like obviously, like if you're gay you're not going to have that experience, but when
Yeah.
you're in the community, it's quite lovely and it's hard to leave behind just because you know that the beliefs that create that community are insane.
Right. Exactly. In fact, that is a motivation to, I don't know, force yourself to believe, which is not possible, but to tell yourself you believe, to lie to yourself that you believe, tell others you believe, even if you don't believe, because it is something of a threat, and that they don't treat the people that have fallen away from the faith particularly well, always in
Mhm.
Mormonism. I know people that, if you come out and say, I think Joseph Smith was full of it, like you could lose the most loved people in your life. And,
Mhm.
there is that threat, and it makes it difficult. It's not quite as bad as Scientology, but, it's not great. You used a term in discussing how it is you can find fulfillment in your life as secular or atheist, and that was the internal meaning making system. Do you mind telling me a little bit about the internal meaning making system? I think I have one. I believe. I
Yeah.
feel like I have a purpose driven life. To quote, who was that? Some
Yeah.
pastor wrote a book
Yes. Yeah.
entitled that.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Rick Warren, that was it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, but what did you mean when you said internal meaning making system?
Yeah, so the people who do better outside of religion are personality types that tend to be okay with a couple things. First of all, they tend to be more okay with ambiguity, like not knowing. Because if you need order and structure and closure, we know that that personality type tends towards fundamentalism because that's psychologically keeping them functioning when they need that level of order and structure and closure. So personality types that tend to not need religion as much and thrive outside of it with little or no work are ones that can handle ambiguity, handle chaos. They usually value, freedom and authenticity and creativity and things like that. But they also have a sense that I can create my own meaning, and they enjoy doing that, or they do that quite naturally. Whereas when you're raised religious, when you walk into a Mormon church, they'll give you all the good stuff as far as things that you need as a human, but you are going to have to believe certain things, and they're going to give you your meaning and purpose. Now, it's easier that way because, like, someone just lays out a path for you to just walk on. It's easier that way, but it's never going to be really an authentic life because someone else is giving you your meaning and purpose. Now, some personality types do prefer that because it's just less anxiety inducing to say, like, you are in charge of your one life and then you're going to die. Like we actually have an existential fear of freedom. We like to think as humans that we value freedom, but we actually get really overwhelmed with it. Like, if you want to pick a salad dressing, our brain would prefer to choose between two than 300. Like,
Yeah.
it just takes a lot of work. So we actually have an existential fear of too much freedom, which is why we're drawn to authoritarian uh, gurus or characters or leaders to just say, here's the 12-step program, here's the eightfold plan, whatever it is, because it can release anxiety that way. So, yeah, so the people who do well outside of religion, going back to your question, are ones who either don't mind or enjoy being their own meaning creator and saying, "Oh, I see," rather than seeing this as anxiety inducing, I see a blank canvas where I can paint whatever I want to paint. And that personality type does tend to do better post religion.
Yeah. And one of the other things you were talking about in one of your videos that brings, of all the things that religion brings, that we have to find a way to kind of replace if people are going to fall away from religion, which is, in truth, I've changed it from being anti religious to when I look at the world, I say I'm just against people believing things based on no or bad evidence. Because I
Hmm.
think religion falls under that, but so does every other bad thing in the world right now. But one of the things you talked about was dancing. You said that dancing is psychologically speaking, I mean, possibly on a neurological level, they might be able to measure it due to dopamine releases or whatnot. That it's very good for people. And when I watched your video and I said that, I said maybe that's why being Catholic is so miserable. We don't sing and we don't dance. Our songs are melodyless chants basically,
Hmm.
and there's no dancing of any kind in our services. I mean, we are just sedate. And you were talking about the whirling dervishes in the Islamic faith, and just, in the black churches, the music and the dancing and the clapping, and how beneficial that can be. Um, is that so? I mean, just it's the joy of life that I think we need to replace when you take somebody out of religion. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yes, and this is where sometimes atheists are at a disadvantage because if we know that things like singing together, really good for you, dancing, like when we look at, the study that I was referring to, it does better than both exercise with an antidepressant together. I mean, just really powerful for resetting your nervous system when it comes to depression. So we know religion does all these good things, like accessing wisdom, like listening to, I don't want to say sermons because those tend to be boring, but listening to advice. We need help as humans. That tends to be good for you. Wisdom collection is good for you. Song is good for you. Awe is good for you. Dancing is good for you. All these things. And when a religion comes with all those things already built into the system, it makes it easier for religious people to access all these tools that are good. And so when an atheist hasn't kind of rebuilt some of that into their life, all of a sudden now someone dies, and Jews have these fantastic rituals for what happens day of, what happens the first week. You don't, where you don't have to talk to anyone, and you're not going to go to work, and we're going to take care of you. And then you kind of half come back to society. And then after 6 months, we're really going to pull you back, into the community and make sure that you're okay. And they have this whole system of rituals to help you process grief. And so, as an atheist, if you haven't rebuilt some of those things that are in religion that are good for you, now you're struggling with someone's death that you don't have rituals to process. Now you can read a paper that says dance is good for you. Where are you going to do that? You can read a paper about how singing together is good for you. Where are you going to do that? And you have to start piecemealing it together. And because we're just fundamentally lazy, and
Yeah.
it's harder to do, it takes more motivation than just showing up at a church to build something like it. Sometimes this is where atheists are at a disadvantage when it comes to their mental health. So something like dancing, um dancing has been a part of most religions. When it starts to get really institutionalized, that's when, like, they'll take away psychedelics. That's when they'll take away song, like ecstatic dancing and song, because now it becomes more of a business and a bureaucracy and institutionalized. But at its root, most religions do have access to things like song and dance and even psychedelic use, but those
Yeah.
go away once it becomes a business.
Interesting. My mind immediately went to the Shakers, 19th century American religion, where it was all about dancing, but they had a fatal flaw to their religion, which is they were 100% celibate. You couldn't have sex even with your wife or husband, and they died out. Go figure. But
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it.
they definitely had a lot of dancing. So you talk about spirituality from an atheistic point of view. What I mean, Sam Harris talks about that a little bit. He's a well-known atheist as well. Some of us scratch our heads a little bit when we hear about atheists talking about spirituality. Do you mind expanding on
Yeah.
what you mean when you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because, yeah, I think when you talk about the four atheists of the atheist apocalypse, they'll meet that word differently. So Sam Harris much more open to using the word spiritual. Richard Dawkins is like, I don't get this at all. This is
Yep.
dumb. But even Richard Dawkins, like, he still will sing Christmas carols, and he still values aspects of Christianity as a culture, and he has been talking about that more lately, even for him.
Yeah.
So spirituality for me, and other people may define it differently, but when we talk about a word like spirituality that can contain all the different kinds of spirituality, even non-theistic religions like Buddhism and things like that, I think what it boils down to is connection to your deepest self and connection outside of self. For a lot of people, that connection outside of self is to something supernatural, or some kind of higher power. For me, it doesn't. For me, it's connecting outside of myself to other humans and nature, and this kind of story that we're all collectively writing as humans. And I feel great connection to that. So spirituality for me doesn't include supernatural elements, but we just don't have a secular word that really means that level of inner peace and connection with yourself, trying to understand the universe within you that you'll never fully understand, and also trying to connect to the universe outside of you that you'll never fully understand. And that process, that's why there's lots of spirals in spirituality and labyrinths, because it's always coming back to this idea of connecting more within you, connecting more outside of you. um and atheists have, I understand the allergy to words that have religious baggage. I do. But my fear is that if we throw away the baby with the bathwater, is now we're looking at essentially nihilism, where we've thrown out religion and all the shitty things about religion. I'm on board with all the bullshit. But I'm afraid that if we don't hold on to something in this, that now we're going to head towards nihilism. And when we hit nihilism, people turn to political religion or consumerism or numbing or suicidality. And I don't like those any more a lot of those are worse than religion. I would rather be a part of a religion than a political religion. Political religions could be just as dogmatic and violent, and they have no soul to it. Like, at least
Mhm.
with a religion, you'll get some mysticism or a nice parable from Jesus or something. Political religions, I think, are worse. So I'm wary of this baby in the bathwater, and I think Sam Harris and other atheists are too. Nick Jankel is another one. He wrote The Spiritual Atheist, and I there's something here that I feel like is worth preserving, that sometimes as atheists, in our kind of high horse snarkiness about how religion is stupid, we're maybe too quick to throw away things in it that are good for people, and we don't have a secular word for the umbrella that is ritual, transcendence, community, all the things that I've mentioned. We don't really have a secular word for that. Well-being is the one that Sam Harris uses to try to get there, but I just feel like spirituality is I almost just want to reclaim it from religion's grasp.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard it said, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, you know? And I will confess that as maybe a younger man, I stuck up my nose at people that said that. Like, what the heck do you mean?
Now
But
that phrase still bothers me, because like new age spirituality is just like, it's oftentimes just religion in a new package. It's still prosperity gospel, and the manifesting, I can't get behind any of that. Astrology drives me nuts. So some of that spiritual but not religious group annoys me too, but I still think there's something in there worth claiming.
absolutely. And, there is so much there are so many detrimental effects from religion. One of them that you talked about that I wrote down, which gets me into our society as we have it today, that people that a belief in Jesus, it reduces the motivation to make the world a better place, basically. You did a video about that. And I certainly agree, but as always, you come with the receipts. So would you mind telling me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we can, anecdotally, you probably know someone who's like this, so I don't know how much I have to defend this with data, just because you all probably know someone who says, like, "We don't really need to worry about that because Jesus is coming." Like, I
Oh,
know
so
many
climate change.
people, like, climate change, there's even just dealing with the Middle East and what long-term prosperity gospel is. We're not really motivated to even be a part of that if this is just a sign of Jesus coming. And so it's like, why are we even going to mess with it? Like, all of this is prophesied and it's going to
This is
happen, and
good
then Jesus is
news.
going to come. This is
Oh,
great news. I know it's not even just like hyperbole, or I've seen someone on the internet, like people directly in Boise, Idaho, where I live, like I know, talk this way. Like, it's not, I don't really have to go too far into studies, but there are studies that show that when you believe that Jesus is coming, it reduces your it reduces how uncomfortable you are with suffering. Because you can know that everything's going to be okay, and that child that was abused or whatever the situation was, at least they're at peace now. They're with Jesus, and it gives you this spiritual bypassing where I don't have to feel this really uncomfortable feeling, that really, like, looking at pictures of the Middle East and dead children. I don't have to look at this because I can know that everything's going to be okay. So it bypasses uncomfortable feelings. That's why we have spiritual bypassing in every aspect of religion and spirituality. It shows up everywhere because it's just an easy way out of feelings that we don't want to feel. The problem with that is that if we don't sit with that feeling, it doesn't change us. And if it doesn't change us, it doesn't change how we show up in the world. And so if we actually don't sit with that tragedy of what happened to that child, that was, for me, it was Gabriel Hernandez, who was a little boy, who has a documentary on Netflix, who was tortured by his parents and then killed. And it was one of the first documentaries that I watched after I lost my faith in God, where now I have no buffer for these feelings. I just have to sit with the actual reality that it was a child's experience, and not just one child. Now I have to realize that it's a lot of children, that they came into the world, they suffered from the people who should have cared for them, and then they died, and I had no buffer for it. And for about 2 weeks, I just laid on the couch because I had like an emotional flu, because it was the first time that I really had to feel the suffering of the world without that buffer. And it took me out. It was so painful. To this day, like, you can see it in my eyes that it's so painful.
yeah.
And but sitting with that means that I'm more likely to check in on my social worker friends and see how they're doing and support them in their workload. I'm more likely to watch for signs of abuse and be able to say something. I'm more likely to adopt children, which I did. I'm more likely, it changed the way that I showed up in the world. It changes because I want to deal with this now and not just bypass this feeling and imagine this kid in heaven doing okay, because I can't do that anymore. And so we just know enough about human motivation to know that if you don't sit with that feeling and have it change you, it's not going to change how you show up in the world. Now that doesn't mean that every Christian is like going around littering and just, destroying the earth and doesn't care. There are a lot of Christians who really try to make the world a better place because of their Christianity. I know that that exists, but I just don't see that being as motivating as truly believing that this is the only planet in the universe where we know we have life, and this is the one life that we know that we have. That's a far greater motivator for making the world a place where there's less suffering than when you have that out. And
Right.
that just seems to be an intuitive way to understand human motivation, even without looking at the studies. And there are studies that show that. Although I will say, the younger generation Christians, Gen Z Christians, tend to do this less. They tend to care a little bit more about their environment than their grandparents, but I still think it's there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
still think it's there.
But I mean, you said it at the opening of the show that people create gods, individual gods for themselves. So I find that because of that, that the people who do good in the name of Christianity, if you get to know them, they're just good people. And they're doing good because that's in them. And the Christianity might just be the reason that they say they're doing it, but just like a secular person, it's in you. I always, when debating Christians, which I do so often, I'm saying, if you don't think the Bible is literally true and every word of it is perfect, and you say, I like this part, but not this part, which so many Christians do, I'm saying then the morality is clearly not in the book. It's
Yeah,
in
you're
you,
already
and
subjective
you're seeing
morality.
it here and
Yes.
not seeing it there,
Yeah. The
I've
only
been,
pushback I would have to that is I do know people, especially because I was in my doctorate program was in open and relational theology, which is a much more nuanced kind of God, a relational God. And I do know a few people where they so believe in a God of love, and it drives their life in the sense of, how can I act right now from a place of love, from what Jesus would do? How would the good Samaritan act in this moment? That they do that exercise so often in their life that I do think it creates amazingly beautiful love-driven people. I wouldn't say that that means that that God is true or real, but them believing in it, it's like believing in that projection, like projecting out the ideal of love and then working in relationship with it your whole life. I do think that that has the capacity of creating really beautiful, lovely people. I just think that religion is not doing that for the majority of people.
yeah. Here's a thought I was having because I do want to get into our society today, if it's okay. But that I see the callousness, and I've actually talked to Trump supporters who recoil at the callousness of their brothers and sisters in the MAGA movement, particularly towards like alligator Alcatraz or just throwing people on planes and throwing them in third world prisons and whatnot. And I had the thought where I was like, well, that's nothing compared to the punishment they think is coming for all of us. Like I've committed no crime, but because I don't believe in Jesus, they think they just walk around cool with the fact that I'm going to be burned in a lake of fire forever. So these punishments seem tame compared to the punishment that they've already allowed themselves to be okay with. I mean, this is based on no psychology or sociology or any study or data, which is the world you live in, just out of my mind. But it's, yeah, it just, religion seems like such a net negative that when I watch your videos and you talk about that, people that fall away from faith or don't have a faith, it can be so bad for them. And then as I said to you before we started rolling here, like there's a talk about the lonely young man crisis we're having, and they do have religion, which is the religion of MAGA, the worship of Trump, in as near as I can tell. Um, and if we took all that away from them, I mean, we've already seen what lonely young men can do, the incels can do in the way of, it's not something I like talking about, but school shootings and things like that. Like,
Mhm.
and so I feel like we as a society, we are in a dangerous place where the modern
Mhm.
world and science has given us so many answers, and the gaps that we were filling with God are
Mm.
shrinking and disappearing as fast as they can. I mean, there's not a lot of gaps left for God to be shoved into. I mean, there's still, where did the universe come from? Okay, you're going to have
Yeah.
that one
Mhm.
probably forever. But beyond
Yeah.
that, I don't know if you know a comedian by the name of Tim Minchin,
I don't
but
think so.
he had a line that he said, every mystery in the history of the world that we ever solved turned out to be not God. you
Yeah.
know that's just true. Like, we had all
Yeah.
these things that we attributed to God, every one of them, we're picking them off, not God, not
Yeah.
God, not God,
That
not God.
road, that's a one-way street. It never goes the other direction.
Yeah. Not
Yeah.
once have we been like, oh, turns
Oh,
out it was God. What do you
yeah.
know?
A supernatural, it's never been where a supernatural explanation turns out to be a better explanation than whatever the naturalistic explanation was. That's a one-way street.
Yeah. So you do talk about the dangers of pulling a people away from religion and what could happen to a society. And a question right before we get to that is, you talked about societies and their gods. Are there atheistic societies? Is there a society that you could define, if I told you about the society, that you would say that society would have no God? Have you come
Yeah,
across
there
that?
Yeah, so you can get societies that don't really need to create a god that's watching over everything. For that, I mean, when you even look at the Nordic countries, you need some things for that to happen. You need stability, you need some wealth, you need some education. You also need a small homogenous population so that there's inner trust without there having to be a god that's watching over everyone. You don't need to do that if you're actually like if you know your neighbor and you are similar in culture to your neighbor. There are, cities in Finland or whatever where there's no one checking out the food. Like everybody just goes in and scans their stuff, and it's not manned by anyone because this is our community, this is our town, shop, and we all support it, and nobody's going to steal from everybody else because you're my neighbor and I know your name, and it just can function like that quite well. But you need quite a bit of stability um, in the society to be able to do that. So what we know about poverty is that poverty and instability creates religion, and then religion continues to perpetuate the poverty. And so atheists like to say that, the most violent countries in the world are religious. And while that is true as far as the data, it's not that the religion causes the violence. It's usually the violence and the instability causes the psychological need for religion. You need a story that can withstand the bullshit that is your life. And when you are in a small town of Finland where everybody knows your name and everybody's wealthy and there's social safety nets and there's not different groups that see things differently that are vying for resources, then you're essentially able to function quite well without a god. I don't know uh, if we could get there. America is not like that. We don't really have a culture outside of Christianity. We destroyed all culture in when in Christianity's crusade, we kind of destroyed whatever was culture before we became Christian. And so I don't know, a lot of people want to say, like, let's just be more like the Nordic countries, and it's like I see what you're saying there, but like we are not a small homogenous group of people with a social safety net and culture outside of religion. We actually don't have that. And so then what do we do in that case? So going to your question, then I think the root of your question is the one that I think about almost every day, to be honest, is when it comes to existential risk for humans, what is actually more dangerous, fundamentalism or nihilism? And we don't know the answer to this question. And this is why I think the four-part Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debates was kind of the conversation of our time, even though people have a lot of feelings. Jordan Peterson has said so many things about in so many areas that everybody has a strong opinion on him. But essentially, it boiled down, especially in the third debate, it boiled down to what's going to do us in as humans. Is it fundamentalism and terrorism and blowing each other up because of our God? Or is it nihilism, which is when we lose community and meaning and purpose and service and awe and transcendence? When we lose all of that, Now we're talking about school shooter stuff, and we're talking about suicide, and we're talking about consumerism, and we're talking about numbing behaviors going up in the secular world, where people are just numbing themselves to death because what's the point of it all? And we've never had a society of nihilists. We don't even know what that looks like. We don't know if we're capable of surviving it. We've never had to before. We've always had a story, always, whether it was a religious story or a political story, or if you're in Japan, then the emperor is God and that's your story. We've always had a story, and so we don't really know what humans are capable of surviving outside of how we've always survived, which is stories and communities. And so we don't know which one is more dangerous for us, religion or nihilism. So Sam Harris is on the side saying, I'm much more worried about religion. I will take some nihilism and there's going to be some suicidality and there's going to be some problems, but we only have the hope of getting the world to be better if we can stop blowing up each other over our gods and start solving modern problems. And then Jordan Peterson kind of takes the other side, which says, once we pull at this strand, the whole society and the whole infrastructure, which is what you saw in the Eric Weinstein video, the entire infrastructure of what we are as humans is going to fall apart if you pull on this thread, and it's going to end up destroying us, because we cannot psychologically handle life without meaning, life without story, life without community. There's just no point at that point, and that's going to bring out the worst of us. And so essentially everybody's in these conversations, we're trying to decide, we have the data that shows that both fundamentalism and nihilism very bad for humans, but we don't know which one is actually going to do us in.
Um, uh,
What do you think?
well, I think that you are making me ask a question I have not asked, I don't think ever, or certainly not in 20 years since I became a loud and proud atheist. Um, which is, I always thought the answer was religion was doing so much harm that we needed to do away with it. But I look at America today, and we are in bad shape. And you have me asking, is it better to try and fix Christianity, which is so ingrained in our culture, and just make it the nicest, sweetest, most benign version of itself? Is that better than helping people out of this belief in God? And it's not a question I have an answer to in my head, but I guess I'll pose it to you. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, it's it's a question that I think about all the time, especially in the ethics of what I'm doing, because I do think it's unethical to eventually you have to choose what's more important, truth or well-being. If I push someone into the void and they end up committing suicide, I don't like ethically, that does not feel very good. I don't want to be in that situation. So it's a hard it's just a hard question. For me, even though I think people are going to struggle without religion, people are going to struggle. I did too, facing death and facing the fact that the universe doesn't care. I'm more willing to go through what terrible growing pains lie ahead for the chance that we could accept what seems to be reality, which is that we're on this planet and we don't really know why, but we seem to suffer more or less. And let's maybe start getting together and solving modern problems so that there's less suffering. I'm more willing to uh, go through the growing pains of what it would take to lose God than to just kind of coddle ourselves. And like,
Yeah.
would it be more comfortable to have a world with benevolent, the nicest forms of Christianity, where everyone's just kind and you have your neighborhood church and you get married and you have children and when you die you're going to see them again? Is like, we have statistics that show that you'll probably suffer less and you'll have less depression. It's a security blanket. It might even make life feel better. But if you were to force me and like put a gun to my head on this one, I would rather go through collectively what it would mean to leave that security blanket, even though it's going to be hard and it's going to get really ugly. And we're going to fall in. Nietzsche predicted the first thing that we're going to do is fall into political religions, which is what happened in the 20th century. Even so, I just like you, I just feel like I would rather face what is than coddle myself with what is not. and that's my
Yeah.
personality type. That answer happens for people like you and me who are willing to pay the high cost of truth. And not everybody has that personality type, but for me, I'd rather face what is, even though it's harder, than to coddle myself with a binky or security blanket.
Yeah. And plus, I can't be that person so condescending that it's go ahead with your little religion if it's good for everybody or whatnot. I you know I try and talk to religious people with as much respect as possible, and by that I mean I just give it to them straight. I don't sugarcoat, and I just tell you you're an adult, and I respect the heck out of you, and you seem like a smart person, so I'm going to tell you you're into a fairy tale, you know, and I know you find that offensive, but this is just me being as respectful as I can. That'd be disrespectful if I decided that you were some special person that I need to coddle and treat special and be and tiptoe around issues with. Like, I respect you enough that I'll just look you in the eyes and tell you how I feel. But I also am like, man, I mean, just this week, the EPA is not going to monitor emissions anymore of factories
Yeah.
and whatnot. Like, we are
Well, and we
on a
just saw
rocket ship to
we
oblivion.
just saw last week that now churches can officially endorse political candidates without losing their tax exempt status. So not only are corporations people, but now churches
Mm-hmm.
are too, and so that changes things too. So it's scary out there, but yeah,
Yeah.
I there's dangers on both sides, and so where I'm at is like I'm helping people flee this like burning building of religion that have hurt them, but I'm like wary of this cliff that's ahead of us, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to find the place in the middle, and really, the place in the middle, like the difference between the most spiritual atheist, someone like me who like really is embracing spirituality, and the most deconstructed Christian, where like it doesn't really mean that it's more about this. The difference between those two people is not a lot. Like it's a hair, and maybe it's an important hair, but it's just a hair. And I just want everyone to get to that place, whether you come from the side of secularism or you come from the side of religion. That place in between fundamentalism and nihilism is the place where not only you will thrive, but also doesn't seem to hurt society. And so however people get there, I want to kind of help that. And that tends to be ethically like where I end up. And then my rule for myself on social media or just with people in general is I want to be tough on ideas but soft on people. So I'm going to
Yeah.
be tough on beliefs and ideas that I think are causing harm in the world. But I was once Mormon. I was once like doing apologetics for Mormonism. I'm not going to call religious people stupid. Like that was me too.
Yeah.
And we're far more emotional than we are rational. We do all this rational work with religion because emotionally we just don't want to die, and emotionally we want to be okay. I understand that. I'm human. I can understand all of those emotions. So I think when we do that, if we can be tough on ideas and soft on people and allow people to get to that happy middle place, whether they come from religion or from secularism, I think that's the project I'm most invested in, even if it's a losing battle, even if religion wins. It's kind of
Yeah.
the rock I've chosen to push up the hill anyway.
I've sort of co-opted a Christian expression and twisted it for my atheist points, and I always say, "Love the believer, hate the belief." You know,
Right. Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
has been my
I like that.
approach.
Yeah, no,
And you
that's
know,
good. I like that.
point of pride, every Christian I've debated on this show, I still DM with, I'm still friends with.
Mm,
We, shoot each other messages just to make sure we're okay. I truly love the believer. I hate the belief. As an atheist, and I'll just close my closing thoughts on this, is that the thing that gave me comfort was when I realized you're all I have in this world, brothers and sisters and fellow human beings. Like you and us together, we're the only ones that can make this life worth living and good. You can't do it by yourself. And it's made me it's expand my humanism. And this
mm,
planet is, it's nobody's, there's no magic wands, there's no rainbow at the end of the flood of a promise to not destroy the earth again. It's a delicate biological place, and we have to treat it well
mm,
because I've become more conscious of my
mm,
of fellow humans and of the planet because of my atheism, because there's nobody that's going to help us out here, and that there's no heaven to go to, that this is it. We have to make it as good and as beautiful and as loving an experience as possible, because you're just here for a second.
mm.
Make it the best.
Yeah, I love that because some people will ask me how, I don't want to become an atheist or, they get this sense of like Richard Dawkins atheism where it there's a sense where people fear that you lose the magic, and that last 2 minutes of what you just did, like, people don't realize that, and for me too, that it was hard at first when I lost my beliefs and it was dark for a time, but the magic is still back, just in a different way. The idea that, rather than God doing everything and so the magic is with God, now it's so magical just to be alive and just to be on a planet at all, to exist at all.
Yeah.
The fact you can break it down where it's like the fact that we are across the world and I'm making mouth sounds and sometimes you make mouth sounds and it resonates in my body and we're playing together and we're just talking to each other about what it's like to be human and like what's your story? How's it going for you over there as a human? There's a beauty in it and a sacredness in it and a magic in it to realize that this God stuff, this religion stuff, all these words that we've put to things, it was all us. And there is a sacredness to that, and the magic comes back for me, and it doesn't in any way lose the magic that all of this God stuff was happening in my own brain. My brain's amazing. Like it makes me,
Amazing.
you know what I mean? Like your brain has been the magic the whole time. When you've been talking to God, you've been talking to yourself. When you have dreams and figure things out or have ideas that pop into your head, your subconscious was working on that. Like we know that like all of this, what you felt was revelation was actually you. Like that's not
Mhm.
magical. That's incredibly magical. That was you. And so for me, yeah, the magic and the zest for life is back, but I will admit I wasn't there at first, and I had to learn how to it wasn't intuitive to me. For people who enjoy life more naturally, I think it's more intuitive. For me, it wasn't intuitive, and I tend to be more on the neurotic spectrum, and so I had to learn, but it did come back for me, and I'm much happier now as an atheist in the magic of what I think, of my life now as an atheist than when I was thriving in Mormonism. I'm doing much better now than even then. And so hopefully that just gives hope to someone listening
Yeah.
who may be struggling and feeling like I can't go back to religion, but I'm not exactly thriving out here. That's the population that I tend to work with the most.
Yeah. I always say, you're a sentient being on a rock in an infinite vacuum, and you get to contemplate that. What
Yeah.
could be more awe-inspiring than that? There's a band called Neutral Milk Hotel, and they have a line that just says how strange it is to be anything at all.
Yeah.
And it just hit me so hard when I heard it. And I heard Jerry Seinfeld interviewing Stephen Colbert, who's Catholic
Mm.
and religious.
Mhm.
And Stephen Colbert said, "My favorite lyric ever is Neutral Milk Hotels, how strange it is to be anything at all." And I was like,
Mm.
that's how it is. Like, where are we? What are we? How
Yeah.
strange it
I'm a
is
meat
just to
suit
be
with
here.
electricity in my brain, and it chose its own core values. I just discover them. I didn't even choose them. And then sometimes like some music like makes me feel like dancing and some music I don't really
Mhm.
like at all. And it's all a mystery and all of that magic can really come back. But yeah, but if that's not where you're at, then you can actually I'm a testament to the idea that you can learn to be more like that when maybe you don't feel like that right now, especially with like the world on fire. You can still find a way to dance even in the madness and absurdity of it all.
Wow. I know a good final line when I hear it. And that was it. Britt Hartley, thank you so much for joining us on Dogma Debate.
Oh, this is so fun. I could have done this for another few hours. This is
Awesome. Well, we will.
absolute peak play for me.
Nice. We'll have you back. Thanks again.